I never thought I would become the kind of person who could walk away from family in their moment of need. But there I was, standing in the marble lobby of the Fontainebleau Miami Beach, watching my mother and sister get escorted by security to a budget room while their designer luggage trailed behind them like evidence of their fallen kingdom. Let me back up. 3 months earlier, I had been a different person entirely. The kind of person who believed that family meant everything, that love was measured in sacrifice, and that being the successful one in the family came with certain obligations. At 31, I had built what most people would consider an enviable life. My marketing career had taken off beyond my wildest expectations. I had a corner office overlooking downtown Atlanta, and my salary had just crossed into 6 figures. More importantly, I had finally reached a place where I could afford to give my family the kind of experiences they had never had growing up. My mother, Diane, had raised Belle and me as a single parent after Dad died when I was 12. Those early years had been marked by government assistance, second-hand clothes, and the kind of financial anxiety that never really leaves you, even when your circumstances improve. Mom had worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and I had spent my teenage years babysitting Belle while Mom pulled double shifts at the diner and the grocery store. Belle, being 8 years younger, had been my responsibility more than my sister. When I got my first real job after college, it felt natural to start helping out. A few hundred here and there when Mom's car broke down, or when Belle needed money for school supplies. As my income grew, so did my contributions. I paid for Belle's community college courses when she decided she wanted to study photography. I covered Mom's medical bills when her insurance wouldn't approve a procedure. I helped with rent when Mom's hours got cut at the diner. It never felt like a burden because I could afford it, and more importantly, because I thought we were building something together. A family that had finally escaped the poverty that had defined our early years. A family where everyone could pursue their dreams because one of us had been lucky enough to achieve financial stability. Belle had always been the artistic one, the free spirit who saw the world through a lens of creativity and possibility. She was beautiful in that effortless way that some people are born with, all golden hair and bright blue eyes and a smile that could convince anyone to do anything. She had never held a traditional job, instead pursuing her passion for photography and building what she called her personal brand on social media. At 23, she had managed to accumulate a modest following by posting carefully curated shots of her lifestyle, her outfits, and her adventures around Atlanta. Mom had always encouraged Belle's artistic pursuits, often at the expense of practical considerations. When Belle announced she was dropping out of college to focus on her photography full-time, Mom had been supportive. When Belle moved back home because she couldn't afford rent, Mom had welcomed her with open arms. When Belle's various business ventures failed to generate enough income to support herself, Mom had simply absorbed the cost of supporting an adult daughter without complaint. Of course, Mom couldn't actually afford to support Belle any more than Belle could support herself. That's where I came in. Over the years, my financial contributions had evolved from occasional help to regular support. I paid half of Mom's mortgage. I covered Belle's car payment and insurance. I funded their grocery bills and utility payments and countless other expenses that allowed them to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford on their own. I told myself this arrangement worked for everyone. Mom got to keep her house and support her younger daughter. Belle got to pursue her dreams without the crushing pressure of financial responsibility. And I got to be the successful daughter who had made it possible for her family to thrive. The problems had been there all along, but I had become expert at not seeing them. The way Belle would roll her eyes when I suggested she might want to find some part-time work to supplement her photography income. The way Mom would sigh and look hurt whenever I expressed any frustration about the constant financial requests. The way neither of them ever seemed to consider what I might want or need or dream about, because my role in the family was so clearly defined as the provider and problem solver. But I didn't see it as a problem until I decided to plan Mom's birthday trip. Mom had never been anywhere. She had spent her entire adult life working multiple jobs and raising children and scraping by, and she had never experienced the kind of luxury that I had come to take for granted in my business travel. She had never stayed in a nice hotel, never eaten at an expensive restaurant, never been pampered at a spa. For her 62nd birthday, I wanted to change that. I spent weeks researching and planning. I found the perfect suite at the Fontainebleau, one of those oceanfront rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows and a balcony overlooking the Atlantic. I booked first-class flights and made reservations at the kind of restaurants where you need to call months in advance. I scheduled spa treatments and arranged for champagne and flowers to be waiting in the room when we arrived. The total cost was going to be close to $15,000, but I didn't care. This was my gift to the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise us. This was my way of showing her that all those years of struggle had been worth it, that her daughter had become successful enough to give her the vacation of a lifetime. Belle was excited about the trip in the way she was excited about anything that involved luxury and attention. She immediately started planning her outfits and researching the hotel's amenities and talking about all the photos she would take for her social media accounts. She seemed to view the trip as an extension of her personal brand rather than a celebration of Mom's birthday, but I told myself that was just Belle being Belle. The first sign of trouble came when Belle asked if she could invite her friend Amber to join us. Amber was everything I disliked about Belle's social media world concentrated into one person. She was a self-proclaimed influencer with twice Belle's following and 10 times her sense of entitlement. She treated service workers like inconveniences, name-dropped constantly, and had never met an experience she couldn't make about herself. She also had a talent for spending other people's money without appearing to notice she was doing it. I said no immediately. This was a family trip, a celebration for Mom, not a photo opportunity for Belle and her friends. Belle pouted and pleaded, and Mom gently suggested that maybe it would be nice for Belle to have someone her own age to spend time with. I held firm, and Belle finally dropped the subject, but I could tell she wasn't happy about it. We flew to Miami on a Thursday morning in early June. The first-class experience was everything I had hoped it would be for Mom. She kept touching the leather seats and marveling at the hot towels and asking the flight attendant questions about how everything worked. She took pictures of her champagne glass in the window view and sent them to her sister with excited text messages about how fancy everything was. Belle spent the flight taking selfies and posting them to her Instagram story with captions about living my best life and vacation mode activated. She complained that the early departure time had interfered with her sleep schedule and asked if we could upgrade to a larger seat so she could stretch out more comfortably. When I pointed out that we were already in first class, she shrugged and said she had seen bigger seats on some airlines. The suite at the Fontainebleau was spectacular. The living room had white leather furniture and a bar area with top-shelf liquor, and the bedroom had a king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and more pillows than any reasonable person could need. The bathroom had a soaking tub and a separate glass shower with multiple shower heads. The balcony overlooked the pool area and the ocean beyond, with a view that stretched to the horizon. Mom was speechless when she walked in. She stood in the middle of the living room turning in slow circles, taking in the artwork and the fresh flowers in the welcome basket I had arranged. She kept saying, "Oh my goodness, and I can't believe this," and touching things like she was afraid they might disappear. Belle immediately started rearranging the furniture to create better lighting for photos. She moved the flowers to different locations and adjusted the curtains and asked me to take dozens of pictures of her in various poses around the room. When I suggested she might want to let Mom have a moment to enjoy the space, she said she was just documenting the experience for everyone to enjoy later. That evening, I had reservations at Nobu, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Miami Beach. I had specifically requested a table with an ocean view, and I had pre-ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon to celebrate Mom's birthday. The three of us dressed up and took a cab to the restaurant, and for a brief moment, I felt like everything was going exactly as I had planned. The problem started as soon as we sat down. Belle took one look at the menu and announced that she didn't eat fish. This was news to me, since I had seen her eat sushi dozens of times, but she insisted that she had recently decided to become pescatarian and could only eat certain types of sustainable seafood. The waiter patiently explained the restaurant's sourcing practices, but Belle continued to express doubts about whether any of the options met her new dietary standards. Mom tried to mediate by suggesting that Belle could order something simple, but Belle had moved on to complaining about the noise level in the restaurant. She said it was too loud for her to properly enjoy the experience, and she asked the hostess if we could be moved to a quieter table. When the hostess explained that all tables were booked and they couldn't accommodate the request, Belle loudly sighed and said she supposed she would just have to deal with it. The final straw came when the sommelier brought out the champagne I had ordered. Belle took one sip and made a face like she had tasted something unpleasant. She asked the sommelier if they had anything less heavy and suggested that champagne always gave her headaches. When he offered to recommend something else, she said she would prefer vodka cocktails and asked if they could make something fun and colorful that would look good in photos. I tried to salvage the evening by focusing on Mom, asking her about the menu and encouraging her to order whatever she wanted. But Belle's behavior had cast a shadow over the entire meal. Every few minutes, she would find something new to complain about or some way to draw attention back to herself. By the time dessert arrived, Mom looked tired and stressed, and I felt like I was hosting a dinner party for a spoiled teenager rather than celebrating my mother's birthday. The next day, I had planned a spa day for the three of us. I had booked a package that included massages, facials, and access to the hotel's world-class spa facilities. It was supposed to be a relaxing, bonding experience where we could all unwind and enjoy being pampered. Belle arrived at the spa an hour late, claiming she had lost track of time while editing photos from the previous night. She looked at the treatment menu and immediately started asking questions about upgrades and add-ons. Could she get a longer massage? Could she add a body wrap? Could she try the celebrity facial that wasn't included in our package? I explained that I had already paid for specific treatments and that any additional services would be extra. Belle nodded like she understood, but then she proceeded to spend the entire morning adding expensive treatments to her appointment. Every time a technician suggested an upgrade or an add-on, Belle said yes without hesitation. When we met for lunch after our treatments, Belle was glowing and relaxed and full of praise for the spa staff. She showed us photos she had taken in the relaxation room and talked about how she was definitely going to write a review of the experience for her blog. She seemed genuinely happy for the first time since we had arrived, and I felt relieved that the day had been a success. My relief was short-lived. When I went to check out and pay for our treatments, I discovered that Belle had added over $1,000 in additional services to her appointment. The bill included a 90-minute massage instead of the 60-minute one I had booked, a vitamin C facial upgrade, a full-body exfoliation treatment, and something called a hydrating hair mask that cost $200. I stared at the itemized receipt, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I had specifically told Belle that any extra services would be additional charges, and she had agreed to stick to the original plan. But apparently, she had interpreted that conversation as permission to do whatever she wanted and assume I would pay for it. When I confronted her about it, Belle seemed genuinely confused by my reaction. She said she had assumed the upgrades were part of the package, and besides, it wasn't that much money in the context of the overall trip. When I pointed out that not that much money was more than many people spent on their entire vacation, she rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. Mom tried to smooth things over by suggesting that Belle could pay me back for the extra charges, but Belle immediately launched into an explanation of why that wasn't possible. She was between photography clients at the moment, and she had just invested in some new equipment for her business, and she was trying to save money for a workshop she wanted to attend in the fall. The implication was clear. I should be happy to pay for her spa upgrades because I was the one with money. I paid the bill without further argument, but something had shifted in my understanding of the trip. What I had conceived as a generous gift to my family was being treated as an entitlement by my sister. The fact that I was spending my own money to create this experience for them didn't seem to factor into their calculations at all. That evening, Mom suggested we have a quiet dinner at one of the hotel restaurants. She said she was feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the activity and would prefer something low-key for her actual birthday. I thought that sounded perfect, and I made reservations at the hotel's oceanfront restaurant for 7 o'clock. At 6:30, Belle announced that she had changed our plans. She had spent the afternoon researching Miami nightlife, and she had discovered that one of the city's most exclusive beach clubs was hosting a special event that night. She had somehow managed to get us on the guest list, and she said it would be much more exciting than sitting in a hotel restaurant like old people. I tried to explain that the evening was supposed to be about Mom, and Mom had specifically requested something quiet and relaxing. Belle dismissed this concern by saying that Mom needed to be more adventurous and that sitting in a boring restaurant wasn't how you celebrated a birthday in Miami. Mom, caught between her daughters, made the mistake of saying that maybe the beach club sounded fun. I could tell she was trying to keep the peace rather than expressing a genuine preference, but Belle seized on her words as vindication of the planned change. The beach club was everything I had feared it would be. It was loud, crowded, and expensive in the way that Miami establishments specialize in being. The music was so loud that conversation was impossible, the crowd was young and drunk and aggressively stylish, and the drink prices were astronomical. It was exactly the kind of place that Belle loved and exactly the kind of place that would make Mom uncomfortable. To secure a table, I had to agree to a minimum spending requirement of $2,000. The hostess explained this like it was a reasonable request, and Belle nodded enthusiastically like spending $2,000 on drinks was a normal part of any birthday celebration. I signed the credit card slip and tried to tell myself that this was still about making Mom happy. The table was in a prime location overlooking the beach, and Belle immediately started taking photos of the setup. She rearranged the candles and the flowers and the promotional materials to create the perfect backdrop, and then she spent 20 minutes taking selfies from different angles. She posted each photo immediately, adding captions about Miami vibes and birthday celebrations and living our best life. Mom sat quietly in the corner of the booth, looking overwhelmed by the noise and the chaos. I tried to engage her in conversation, but the music was too loud for normal talking. She kept looking around with wide eyes like she couldn't quite believe where she was, and not in a good way. The situation deteriorated further when Belle spotted someone she recognized from social media. It was another influencer, a girl named Chloe who had a much larger following than Belle and a reputation for being seen at all the right parties. Belle immediately abandoned our table to go introduce herself, leaving Mom and me sitting alone in the chaos. When Belle returned 20 minutes later, she was accompanied not just by Chloe, but by Chloe's entire entourage. Suddenly our table for 3 had become a party for 8, and Belle was introducing everyone as her Miami squad and encouraging them to order whatever they wanted because it was her mom's birthday and we were celebrating in style. I watched in horror as Belle's new friends began ordering the most expensive items on the menu: bottles of premium vodka, elaborate cocktail presentations, expensive appetizers that came with dry ice and sparklers. Belle was in her element, playing the role of generous hostess and documenting every moment for her social media accounts. Mom looked like she wanted to disappear. The noise level had reached the point where she was visibly wincing, and the crowd of strangers at our table was treating her like an invisible old woman rather than the guest of honor. Every time I tried to redirect attention back to Mom or suggest we order something special for her birthday, Belle would wave me off and continue entertaining her new friends. The breaking point came when I tried to order a bottle of champagne to toast Mom's birthday. I flagged down our server and asked for the Dom Perignon that I had specifically researched for this moment. It was expensive, but it was Mom's birthday, and I wanted to do something special to acknowledge the occasion. Before the server could respond, Chloe burst into laughter. "Oh my God," she said loudly enough for half the club to hear. "Who orders champagne at a beach club? That's so random." Belle immediately joined in the laughter. "I know, right? My sister is so cute. She doesn't really know how these places work." The humiliation was instant and complete. Here I was, the person who had paid for every aspect of this trip, being mocked by my own sister and her friends for trying to celebrate our mother's birthday in a way they deemed inappropriate. The fact that I was the only one at the table who could actually afford to be there seemed irrelevant to the social dynamics at play. But the worst part wasn't Belle's betrayal. The worst part was what happened next. Mom leaned over and whispered urgently in my ear, "Stop embarrassing us. You're ruining Belle's fun." The words hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, trying to celebrate the woman who had raised me, and she was telling me that I was the problem. Not Belle, who had hijacked the evening and filled our table with strangers. Not the influencer friends who were running up a massive bill on my credit card. Me, for trying to maintain some semblance of the birthday celebration I had planned and paid for. I looked at Mom's face and saw embarrassment there, but not embarrassment about Belle's behavior or the strangers at our table or the way the evening had spiraled completely out of control. She was embarrassed by me, by my attempt to order champagne, by my obvious discomfort with the situation, by my failure to adapt to Belle's vision of how the evening should go. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of my family and my place in it. I had been operating under the assumption that I was a valued member of the family whose contributions were appreciated. But what I saw in Mom's face was the truth. I was an embarrassment to be managed, a problem to be handled, an obstacle to Belle's social success. I stood up from the table without saying a word. Belle was too busy entertaining her new friends to notice, and Mom was focused on managing the social situation rather than checking on my emotional state. I walked away from the table, through the crowd, past the hostess station, and out into the Miami night. I didn't go back to the hotel immediately. Instead, I walked along the beach, trying to process what had just happened. The sound of waves was a relief after the pounding music of the club, and the cool sand felt good under my feet. I needed to think clearly about what I was going to do next. The facts were simple. I had spent $15,000 on a vacation that was supposed to celebrate my mother and strengthen our family bonds. Instead, Belle had turned it into a social media opportunity. Mom had prioritized Belle's happiness over my feelings, and I had been relegated to the role of silent financier whose actual presence was more hindrance than help. But the facts only told part of the story. The deeper truth was that this dynamic had been building for years. Belle had always been the fun one, the charming one, the one whose dreams and desires took priority in family decisions. I had always been the responsible one, the one who could be counted on to handle practical matters and emotional labor without complaint. What I had never understood until tonight was that these roles weren't just different preferences or natural personality traits. They were a system, carefully maintained by Mom and Belle, that allowed them to live beyond their means while ensuring that someone else would always be available to cover the shortfall. I thought about all the times I had written checks for family emergencies, all the times I had rearranged my own plans to accommodate their needs, all the times I had prioritized their comfort over my own. I had told myself these were the actions of a loving daughter and sister, but tonight had shown me the truth. They were the actions of someone who had been trained to believe that her primary value to her family was financial. By the time I made it back to the hotel, it was past midnight. The suite was dark, and I assumed Mom and Belle had returned from the club and gone to sleep. I was wrong. The suite was empty, but there were signs that they had been there. Belle's clothes were scattered across the bedroom floor, and there were room service dishes on the coffee table. A bottle of expensive wine from the minibar was open and half empty, and there were wet towels everywhere from what looked like an impromptu pool party in the bathroom. I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Belle's handwriting, "Gone back to the club with everyone. Don't wait up. XOXO. They had returned to the party without me. After I had walked out in obvious distress, after Mom had told me I was embarrassing the family, they had come back to the room, refreshed and changed, and returned to the club to continue the celebration I was paying for. I sat on the white leather couch in the dark, looking out at the ocean and thinking about the credit card charges that were probably accumulating at the beach club. Belle and her new friends were undoubtedly continuing to order expensive drinks and elaborate presentations, secure in the knowledge that someone else would handle the bill. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I picked up the phone and called the front desk. When the night manager answered, I asked to speak with someone about the billing for my suite. It took a few minutes to connect with the right person, but eventually I was transferred to a supervisor named Mr. Dubois. "Good evening, Miss Carter," he said in the kind of professionally warm voice that luxury hotels train their staff to use. "I understand you have some questions about your account. How can I assist you?" "I need to make some changes to the billing and access for Suite 3205, I said. "I'm the primary guest and the card holder for all charges." "Of course. What changes would you like to make?" I took a deep breath. What I was about to do would have consequences that I couldn't undo, but I was past the point of caring about consequences. "I need you to remove the other guests from the room immediately and transfer them to the least expensive available accommodation. I also need you to remove my credit card from the account and ensure that any future charges are billed directly to them." There was a pause. "I see. And the other guests currently in the room?" "They're not in the room. They're at a beach club running up charges that I'm not going to pay for anymore." Mr. Dubois was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him typing. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "I understand this is a difficult situation. Are you certain you want to proceed with these changes?" "I'm certain." "Very well. I'll need you to come down to the front desk to handle the paperwork, and I'll need to see identification and the credit card that's currently on file." I got dressed and took the elevator down to the lobby. Mr. Dubois was waiting for me at the front desk, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and the kind of unflappable demeanor that comes from years of dealing with wealthy people's family dramas. He handled the situation with perfect professionalism. He explained each step of the process as he removed Mom and Belle from the suite registration and transferred them to a standard room on the third floor. He canceled my credit card authorization and set up a new billing arrangement that would require them to provide their own payment method for any future charges. "What about their belongings?" I asked. "We'll have housekeeping pack their items and transfer them to the new room," he said. "They'll be able to collect their key cards when they return." "And the charges from tonight?" "Any charges incurred up to this point will remain on your account, but going forward, they'll need to handle their own expenses." I signed the paperwork and handed over the old key cards to be deactivated. The whole process took less than 30 minutes, but I knew it would take much longer for the consequences to fully unfold. "Is there anything else I can do for you tonight, Miss Carter?" Mr. Dubois asked. "Actually, yes, I'd like to change my flight to tomorrow morning and book a car to the airport." He nodded like this was a perfectly reasonable request. "I'll have our concierge handle that for you. Would you like me to leave a message for the other guests explaining the situation?" I thought about that for a moment. Part of me wanted to write a long letter explaining exactly why I had made this decision, detailing all the ways they had taken my generosity for granted and treated my feelings as irrelevant. But I realized that would be giving them exactly what they expected: more emotional labor from me, more management of their feelings, more prioritization of their needs over my own. Just tell them that I checked out early and they'll need to handle their own arrangements going forward. By 6 in the morning, I was at Miami International Airport, boarding a flight back to Atlanta. I had managed to book a first-class seat on an early departure, and as the plane lifted off, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. My phone had been buzzing constantly since around 4 a.m., when Mom and Belle had presumably returned to the hotel and discovered the changes to their accommodations. I had turned off the notifications, but I could see missed calls and text messages accumulating on the screen. I didn't read them. Instead, I spent the flight thinking about what I was going to do when I got home. The old Aaron would have been frantically trying to manage the situation, calling the hotel to fix the problem, booking new flights for Mom and Belle, and finding a way to smooth over the conflict without addressing the underlying issues. But I wasn't the old Aaron anymore. The old Aaron had died somewhere between the beach club humiliation and the empty suite and the phone call to Mr. Dubois. The person sitting in C2A was someone new, someone who had finally understood that love and respect were not the same thing, and that being financially capable of solving someone's problems didn't make you obligated to do so. When I landed in Atlanta, I turned my phone back on and saw 47 missed calls and 83 text messages. The progression of messages told the story of their discovery better than any novel could have. From Belle, at 4:15 a.m., where are you? The key cards aren't working. From Mom, at 4:23 a.m., honey, there seems to be some confusion with the hotel. Can you call them? From Belle, at 4:31 a.m., they moved us to some tiny room and want us to pay for everything ourselves. What the hell happened? From Mom, at 4:45 a.m., Aaron, please call me. I don't understand what's going on. The messages continued in increasingly frantic tones as they realized the scope of what had happened. Belle alternated between demanding explanations and hurling accusations. Mom tried to maintain a tone of confused hurt, asking me to call her and help them figure out what had gone wrong. But the message that told me everything I needed to know came from Belle at 6:20 a.m. I can't believe you would do this to Mom on her birthday. You've ruined everything. Even in crisis, even when confronted with the consequences of their own actions, Belle's first instinct was to make me responsible for their situation. Not an apology for hijacking the evening, not acknowledgement of her behavior at the club, not gratitude for the fact that I had already paid for 3 days of luxury accommodation and expensive meals. Just anger that I had stopped being their solution to problems they had created. I drove home from the airport and spent the weekend in my apartment, ignoring the continuous stream of calls and messages. By Sunday evening, the tone of the communications had shifted from confusion and anger to bargaining and guilt-tripping. Mom called and left a voicemail that was clearly designed to manipulate my protective instincts. Aaron, honey, I don't know what happened between you and Belle, but we're stuck here and we don't have enough money to change our flights or pay for the hotel. I'm scared and confused, and I really need you to help us figure this out. Belle's approach was more direct. You are seriously going to leave your own mother stranded in Miami over some stupid argument? What kind of person does that? But I had moved beyond the reach of their usual manipulation tactics. I could see the patterns now, the way they framed every conflict as my responsibility to solve, the way they positioned themselves as victims of circumstances rather than participants in creating those circumstances. On Monday morning, I went to work and focused on my job. I had presentations to give and campaigns to manage and meetings to attend. It felt good to be in an environment where my contributions were valued and my competence was appreciated, where success was measured by results rather than by how much money I was willing to give away. Around noon, I finally listened to all the voicemails and read all the text messages. The latest updates told me that they had managed to find a way home by borrowing money from Mom's sister and booking economy flights on a different airline. They were safe, they were home, and they had handled their crisis without my intervention. The fact that they had ultimately solved their own problem proved what I had suspected all along. They didn't actually need me to fix their situations. They were perfectly capable of handling difficulties when they had no other choice. What they needed from me was not problem-solving ability, but the willingness to be their first call instead of their last resort. That evening, I got a phone call from Mom. This time, I answered. Aaron, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. I don't understand what happened. Why did you leave us like that? For a moment, I felt the old familiar pull, the urge to comfort her, to take responsibility for her distress, to find a way to make everything okay again. But I forced myself to remember how she had looked at me in the beach club, the embarrassment in her voice when she told me I was ruining Belle's fun. I left because you told me I was embarrassing you, I said simply. That's not what I meant. I was just trying to keep the peace. You know how Belle gets when she's upset. Yes, I do know how Belle gets, and I know that whenever Belle gets upset, I'm expected to manage her emotions and fix her problems. I'm tired of managing everyone else's emotions, Mom. But we're family. Family helps each other. Some families help each other, I said, echoing the words I had spoken to myself during those long hours on the beach. Some families have all the members helping each other, but our family has one person helping everyone else, and that's not sustainable anymore. You're being dramatic. We've never asked you for anything you couldn't afford. You've never asked me what I wanted to do with my money instead of giving it to you. There was silence on the other end of the line. Aaron, I think you're upset about something else and you're taking it out on us. Maybe you should talk to someone about what's really bothering you. The suggestion that my reaction was evidence of some deeper psychological problem rather than a reasonable response to years of being taken for granted was so perfectly characteristic that I almost laughed. I am talking to someone about what's bothering me, I said. I'm talking to you. What's bothering me is that I spent $15,000 on a vacation to celebrate your birthday, and you told me I was embarrassing you when I tried to make the evening about you instead of about Belle's social media opportunities. It wasn't that much money for someone in your position. That's exactly the problem, Mom. You've decided that because I'm successful, my money belongs to the family. You've decided that because I can afford to help, I'm obligated to help. You've never once asked me what I want or what my dreams are or what I'm sacrificing by always being everyone else's financial solution. What are you saying? That you're never going to help us again? I'm saying that I'm not going to be the automatic solution to every problem anymore. If you have emergencies, you'll need to handle them the way other families do. If Belle wants to pursue her photography career, she'll need to find a way to support herself while she builds her business. If you want to go on vacation, you'll need to save up for it or find a way to afford it on your own. But we can't afford those things without your help. Then maybe you need to make different choices about how you live. I could hear her crying, and despite everything, it still affected me. But I forced myself to remember that her tears were often a tool rather than a genuine expression of emotion, deployed when other forms of persuasion had failed to get the desired result. I never thought I'd see the day when my own daughter would abandon her family, she said. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. I hung up before she could respond, and I blocked both her number and Belle's. I needed time to think clearly, without the constant pressure of their emotional manipulation and financial demands. The next few months were the hardest and the best of my adult life. Hard because I had to learn how to live without the constant drama and crisis management that had defined my family relationships. Hard because I had to confront the reality that the people I loved most had been systematically taking advantage of my generosity for years. Hard because I had to rebuild my entire understanding of what love and family were supposed to look like. But also the best months because for the first time in my adult life, I was living for myself. I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what other people needed from me. I was discovering interests and dreams that had been buried under years of family obligation and financial responsibility for others. I started taking cooking classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for because my evenings were constantly interrupted by family crises. I joined a hiking group and spent weekends exploring trails in North Georgia, breathing fresh air and moving my body and thinking about nothing more complicated than where to put my feet. I bought a bicycle and started riding to work, taking the long way home through the park just because I could. Most importantly, I started therapy. Drive. Martinez was a specialist in family dynamics and codependency, and she helped me understand that what I had experienced wasn't unusual. Families often develop systems where one member becomes the designated caretaker, provider, and problem solver, while other members learn to depend on that person's resources and emotional labor without developing their own coping skills. The hardest part, she told me during one of our sessions, is that these patterns usually develop gradually and with good intentions. You didn't wake up one day and decide to become your family's ATM. You made a series of loving choices to help people you cared about, and those choices created expectations that became increasingly difficult to meet. She helped me see that my family's reaction to my boundary setting was actually proof that the boundaries were necessary. Healthy families adapt when one member expresses needs or limitations. Unhealthy families escalate pressure and manipulation when their established patterns are challenged. 3 months after Miami, I received a letter from my mother. Not a text message or a voicemail, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my apartment. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as reconciliation. Mom wrote about how much she missed me, how the family wasn't the same without me, how she had been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship. She acknowledged that maybe they had taken my generosity for granted, and she promised that things would be different if I would just give them another chance. But buried in the middle of the emotional appeals was the real purpose of the letter. Belle was facing eviction from her apartment, and Mom didn't have enough money to help her. Mom wasn't asking me directly to solve the problem, but she was making sure I knew about it, counting on my protective instincts to override my stated boundaries. I showed the letter to Drive Martinez during our next session. What do you notice about the timing? She asked. I read through it again. She waited until Belle had a crisis to reach out. And what does that tell you about her motivation for reconciliation? The answer was obvious once she pointed it out. Mom wasn't reaching out because she missed our relationship or because she had genuinely reflected on their behavior. She was reaching out because they needed something from me again, and the emotional appeals were just tools to reestablish my role as the family's financial solution. I didn't respond to the letter. 2 weeks later, Belle called me from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, thinking it might be work-related, I heard her voice for the first time since Miami. Aaron, please don't hang up. I know you're mad at me, but I really need to talk to you. I should have hung up immediately, but something in her tone made me pause. She sounded different, less entitled, more genuinely distressed. I'm listening, I said. I lost my apartment, and my car got repossessed, and I don't have anywhere to go. I waited for the pitch, the manipulation, the expectation that I would swoop in to fix everything. Instead, Belle started crying. I know I messed up in Miami. I know I was selfish and awful, and I know you have every right to hate me. but I don't know what to do anymore. Mom can't help me, and I don't have anyone else to call. For a moment, I felt the old familiar urge to rescue her. Belle was my little sister, and hearing her cry still triggered every protective instinct I had developed during our childhood. But I forced myself to remember the beach club, the spa upgrades, the casual dismissal of my feelings and contributions. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked. "I don't know. I was hoping maybe we could talk. Maybe I could come over and we could figure something out." "Belle, I'm not going to give you money to solve this problem." "I know. I wasn't asking for money. I was asking if we could talk." Something in her voice made me believe her, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the absence of the entitled tone she usually used when she wanted something. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't immediately launched into explanations of why her situation wasn't her fault. "You can come over tomorrow evening," I said. "But I'm not changing my position about financial help." "Thank you. Really, thank you." Belle arrived at my apartment the next evening looking like a different person. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of her carefully curated outfits, and she looked like she had been crying for days. She was carrying a single duffel bag and a backpack, apparently the sum total of her possessions. "Where are you staying?" I asked as I let her in. "Mom's couch, but that's not really working out." I could imagine why. Mom's apartment was small, and having an adult daughter move back home was probably creating tensions neither of them was equipped to handle. We sat in my living room, and for the first time in years, Belle actually looked at me like she was seeing me as a person rather than as a resource. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not just because I need something from you." I waited. I've been thinking about Miami a lot, about how I acted, about the things I said, about the way I treated you. She took a shaky breath. "You planned that whole trip for Mom, and I turned it into something else. I invited strangers to our table, I ran up charges on your credit card, and when you tried to celebrate Mom's birthday the way you wanted to, I made fun of you." This was more self-awareness than Belle had shown in years, and I found myself listening despite my resolution to maintain emotional distance. "But the worst part was what happened at the end. When Mom told you that you were embarrassing us, I should have stood up for you. You were the only reason we were even at that club, the only reason we were in Miami at all, and instead of defending you, I let you walk away." She was crying again, and this time it seemed genuine rather than manipulative. "I keep thinking about all the times you've helped us over the years, all the money you've given us, all the problems you've solved, all the times you've put our needs ahead of your own. And we never said thank you. We never acknowledged what you were sacrificing for us. We just expected it." I had imagined this conversation many times over the past few months, but I had always pictured myself feeling vindicated or satisfied when Belle finally admitted her behavior had been wrong. Instead, I just felt tired. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because losing everything made me realize some things. When I couldn't pay my rent and my car got repossessed and I had to move back in with Mom, I started thinking about how I had gotten to that point. I'm 23 years old, and I've never had to be responsible for anything because you were always there to catch me when I fell." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I never learned how to budget or save money or make hard choices about what I could afford because I never had to. Whenever I got in trouble, I could just call you, and you would fix it. And I told myself that was normal. That's what family does for each other." "But it wasn't what family does for each other," I said. "It was what I did for the family. I know that now. And I know that what happened in Miami wasn't just about one bad evening. It was about years of me taking advantage of your generosity and never giving anything back." We sat in silence for a moment. "What do you want from me, Belle?" "I want to know if there's any way we can have a relationship that doesn't involve you taking care of me financially. I want to know if you can forgive me enough to let me try to be a better sister." It was the conversation I had been waiting for, but it was also the conversation I had stopped believing would ever happen. Belle was actually acknowledging the patterns that had defined our family for years, and she was asking for a chance to change them. "What does that look like to you?" I asked. "I don't know yet. I'm staying with Mom until I can find a job and save enough money for a deposit on a new apartment. I'm selling my photography equipment to pay off some of my debts. I'm going to figure out how to live within my means instead of always expecting someone else to subsidize my choices." This was more concrete planning than Belle had ever done in her life, and despite my skepticism, I found myself cautiously hopeful. "And if you get into financial trouble again, then I'll handle it myself. Or I won't handle it, and I'll face the consequences. But I won't call you for money." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas, but what I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse and something that might have been the beginning of maturity. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "I understand. I know I have a lot to prove, and I know sorry isn't enough to fix what I broke." She stood up to leave, and then turned back to me. For what it's worth, I think what you did in Miami was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. It must have been terrifying to walk away from us like that. It was, I said, but it was also necessary. After Belle left, I called Drive Martinez and scheduled an emergency session. I needed help processing the conversation and figuring out whether Belle's apparent change of heart was genuine or just another form of manipulation. What's your gut feeling? Drive Martinez asked. I want to believe her, but I've wanted to believe her before, and she's always reverted to the same patterns. That's a reasonable concern. People can change, but change requires sustained effort over time, not just good intentions in a moment of crisis. We talked about what it would look like to slowly rebuild a relationship with Belle while maintaining the boundaries I had established. Drive Martinez suggested that I could acknowledge Belle's apology without immediately trusting her with full access to my emotional and financial resources. You can appreciate her effort to take responsibility while still protecting yourself from potential future manipulation, she said. You don't have to choose between complete forgiveness and complete estrangement. Over the next few months, Belle and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. She found a job at a local coffee shop, and for the first time in her adult life, she was supporting herself entirely on her own income. It wasn't much money, but she managed to find a small studio apartment she could afford and gradually replace the belongings she had lost. She also stopped posting constantly on social media. When I asked her about it, she said she had realized that her online persona was built around a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford, and maintaining it had been contributing to her financial problems. I was so focused on looking successful that I never learned how to actually be successful, she told me. Meanwhile, my relationship with Mom remained complicated. She had been the primary architect of the family dynamics that had made me feel obligated to support everyone financially, and she was having the hardest time accepting that those dynamics had changed permanently. She would still occasionally call with emergencies that required immediate financial assistance, apparently hoping that enough time had passed for me to forget my boundaries. When I reminded her that I wasn't going to provide money for non-essential expenses, she would become hurt and angry and accuse me of punishing her for Belle's behavior in Miami. I never did anything wrong, she would say. I was just trying to keep the peace between my daughters. But Drive Martinez helped me see that Mom's peacekeeping had always involved sacrificing my needs to accommodate Belle's wants, and that was its own form of wrongdoing. 6 months after Miami, Mom had a genuine emergency. She needed surgery for a condition that wasn't covered by her insurance, and the out-of-pocket costs were substantial. When she called me about it, I could hear real fear in her voice rather than the manufactured urgency she used for smaller financial requests. I thought carefully about how to respond. This was exactly the kind of situation where my old patterns would have kicked in automatically, but I had spent months learning to distinguish between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises, and I had also learned that helping someone financially didn't require me to solve their entire problem. I'll pay for half of the surgery costs, I told her. You'll need to find a way to cover the other half. But Aaron, I don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to make a payment plan with the hospital, or borrow from someone else, or use a medical credit card. I'm willing to help, but I'm not willing to be the only solution. It was a compromise that felt sustainable to me. I was providing significant help for a genuine medical need, but I wasn't taking complete responsibility for solving Mom's financial problem. Mom was initially resistant to the idea of handling half the cost herself, but when she realized I wouldn't budge, she found a way to make it work. She applied for a medical payment plan and borrowed some money from her sister, and together we covered the surgery costs. The experience taught both of us something important. Mom learned that she was more capable of handling financial challenges than she had believed, and I learned that I could help my family without destroying my own boundaries. By the time my 32nd birthday arrived, my life looked completely different from the year before. I had moved to a larger apartment in a neighborhood I loved. I had started dating again, something I hadn't had time for when I was constantly managing family crises. I had taken a promotion at work that required more responsibility but also provided more creative fulfillment. Most importantly, I had learned to prioritize my own dreams and goals instead of always deferring them to support other people's ambitions. Belle called me on my birthday to wish me well, and for the first time in years, our conversation felt natural and balanced. She told me about a photography project she was working on in her spare time, funded entirely by her own savings. She asked me about my new job and my new apartment and the hiking trip I had planned for the following weekend. I'm proud of you, she said as we were ending the call. For what? For not letting us destroy you. For figuring out how to be happy. I realized that was exactly what I had done. I had figured out how to be happy, something that had seemed impossible during the years when my emotional well-being was entirely dependent on other people's approval and my financial resources were constantly being redirected to other people's problems. The process hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been quick. There had been months of guilt and self-doubt, months of wondering if I was being selfish or cruel, months of learning to tolerate other people's disappointment without rushing to fix it. But on the other side of that difficult process, I had found something I had never expected: peace. I had peace in my relationships because they were based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. I had peace in my career because I was working toward my own goals rather than constantly diverting my energy to manage other people's crises. I had peace in my daily life because I was making choices based on my own values and preferences rather than on other people's expectations. The old Erin had believed that love required sacrifice, that being a good daughter and sister meant always putting family needs ahead of personal wants. The new Erin understood that love without boundaries wasn't actually love at all, but a form of enabling that prevented everyone involved from growing and maturing. I still helped my family when they had genuine emergencies, but I helped them as a choice rather than as an obligation. I still cared about their well-being, but I had stopped taking responsibility for their happiness. I still loved them, but I had learned to love them without losing myself in the process. 2 years after Miami, Belle got engaged to a man she had met at her coffee shop job. He was a teacher, someone with a steady income but no illusions of wealth, and their relationship was built on shared values rather than financial convenience. Belle had grown into someone who could contribute equally to a partnership, and she was proud of her financial independence in a way she had never been when she was dependent on my support. Mom had also adjusted to the new family dynamics, though it had taken longer and required more boundary enforcement on my part. She had found a full-time job with benefits, something she had avoided for years because my financial support had made it unnecessary. She was more stressed but also more capable, and I could see her developing a sense of pride in her ability to handle her own responsibilities. We had family dinners occasionally, but they were different now. Instead of conversations dominated by crisis management and requests for help, we talked about books and movies and current events. Instead of me being cast in the role of family financial advisor, we all participated equally in discussions about our work and our interests and our plans for the future. The relationship wasn't perfect, and probably never would be. Too much had happened for us to completely return to the easy intimacy of my childhood, but it was honest in a way it had never been before, and it was sustainable in a way the old patterns never were. On a warm evening in late spring, I was sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, reading a novel and listening to the sounds of the city below. My phone buzzed with a text message from Belle, a photo of her and her fiancé at a restaurant, celebrating their engagement with a meal they had saved up for and paid for themselves. The photo made me smile, not just because Belle looked genuinely happy, but because her happiness wasn't my responsibility. She had built a life that brought her joy, and she had done it through her own efforts and choices. I had helped her get to a place where she could make those choices, but not by giving her money or solving her problems. I had helped her by refusing to enable her dependence, by forcing her to develop her own strength and resilience. As the sun set over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about the woman I had been 2 years earlier, the woman who had planned an expensive vacation as an expression of love, only to discover that love without respect was just another form of exploitation. The woman who had walked away from her family in a Miami hotel lobby, uncertain whether she was making a brave choice or a selfish one. I thought about the phone call to Mr. Dubois, the moment when I had finally stopped trying to manage everyone else's emotions and started protecting my own. It had felt like destruction at the time, like I was burning down everything I cared about. But what I had actually been doing was clearing space for something healthier to grow. The vacation was over, but the life I was building in its place was better than any trip I could have planned. It was a life where my worth wasn't measured by my utility to others, where my love wasn't conditional on my willingness to be exploited, and where my happiness wasn't dependent on other people's approval. It was the life I should have been living all along, and I was finally brave enough to claim it.